Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you had a good lunch. So to kick off our second panel, scroll down, from Nuclear Legacies from UChicago to Diné, Bikéyah. On December 2nd, 1942, scientists at the University of Chicago achieved the first self-sustained nuclear chain reaction. So I wanted to kind of start by prefacing that event because I think there's been a lot of commemoration of those nuclear legacies here at UChicago. Some of you may have seen a statue that's on campus. There was an event held 4 years ago that commemorates that history. So perhaps in this venue, this is an opportunity for Diné scholars, community members to speak back to that legacy from a Diné perspective, because the legacy of uranium extraction, hit particularly hard on our homelands. So kind of prefacing with that orientation, I brought together this panel of scholars, and I wanted to start with Dr. Andrew Curley. He is a professor at the University of Arizona. Sorry, I'm bringing up your bio still. An assistant professor in the School of Geography, Development, and Environment at the University of Arizona. His research focuses on the everyday incorporation of Indigenous nations into colonial economies, analyzing how Indigenous nations continue to thrive despite decades of forced removal, land dispossession, and economic underdevelopment. Within Indigenous communities, he investigates how extractive industries produce a particular kind of colonizing relationship that expands social difference and creates new cultural understandings of resources. Building on ethnographic research, his publications speak to how Indigenous communities understand coal, energy, land, water, infrastructure, and development in an era of energy transition and climate change. He is Diné and a citizen of the Navajo Nation. Join me in welcoming Dr. Curley.
Thank you, Dr. Montoya. Thank you, everybody, for attending this event, and thank you to the organizers of this symposium. It's been a really good series of presentations, so I'm really happy and honored to be invited to also participate and to share with you some information, some histories, and legacies, notorious and sordid as they are, about the history of uranium mining in the Navajo Nation. And I'm going to look at it from the perspective of how it was discussed and how it was understood during the times of its promotion, during the histories of its development, and to points when we started to realize, as a people, as Diné people, we started to realize that it was a grave health concern for many of our people and communities. So my name is, I got to do, I guess, because I'm with other Diné people here. Usually when there's no other Navajo people, I just skip the introductions. But I'm Bikéyah is my maternal clan. Hanagani is my paternal clan, and Bikéyah again, and then Kia'ani. So you all know where you fit within that. Anyway, so some of you don't even realize that we're related based on that. But anyway, so like Dr. Montoya said, I'm coming from Arizona, and I'm in the School of Geography and Development Environment. And so that also informs kind of the approach that, that I'm taking to this presentation. So the title of the presentation is Do Nalyeda, and that's coming from a specific phrase in the Diné Natural Resource Protection Act that was passed in 2005 by the Navajo Nation Council, and I'll talk more about that toward the end. But I think that helps to shape how we think about uranium and how we've come to think about it within the Navajo Nation. And so what this phrase is saying is that you're not supposed to extract things from the ground. You're not supposed to take things out of the ground like uranium that are poisonous. It's a prohibition. It's a regulation of sorts. You know, it fits within our environmental grammar, our environmentalist grammar, but it's actually a Diné concept. It's something that is organic and that's produced socially and into today and within today's environmental conversations on the Navajo Nation. So we are informing our own environmental governance and actually exceeding in many ways where beyond where the United States is in terms of how it thinks about resources and development, and I'll get to that toward the end of the presentation. But to give you a history, so uranium became a development objective especially for the United States military in the 1940s and 50s to stockpile nuclear weapons. You know, it was used immediately to destroy whole cities in Japan. You know, during World War II, and in acts of war crimes. You know, we were already in the Southwest complicit in that, with where we were getting uranium and testing uranium, like at the Trinity site. And so, you know, we are immediately incorporated into this industry that takes up after, you know, the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that is part of the arms race of the Cold War against communist bloc and the Soviet Union. And what was in sight of U.S. planners, energy developers, was a Grant's uranium belt, part of which extends through Diné land, through the Navajo Nation, and also other indigenous nations like the Acoma and others. That's a Navajo way of understanding the Southwest. Diné and others. And so, but no, that's, you know, there's many nations that were part of that extractive legacy, that extractive industry. So that's something that I think is important to know, is that it's actually more than just Navajo people, although we were some of the most impacted and affected by it. Hispanic communities too, like in Grants, New Mexico, you know, people who are racially structured in U.S. Racial hierarchies in places of disadvantage. You know, that's who are immediately at risk of contamination by participation in the industry. And how were they at risk? They were at risk by becoming the laborers or workers, the people who went into the mines and dug out its ore, which, you know, you can see in this picture. You know, with little protection and ventilation, you know, being exposed directly to the radioactive material. And even by the 1920s, uranium was known to be to be cancerous to people. You know, there was studies in Czechoslovakia at the time that demonstrated this, and the post-war planning ignored this knowledge in order to develop, you know, this nuclear arsenal. And part of that was the creation of the Atomic Energy Act, the Atomic Energy Commission, the Department of Energy. All of these things were institutions that were created after World War II in the era of development in order to facilitate the expansion of nuclear arms within the United States, especially coming out of the Southwest. When we get to the 1960s, nuclear energy is also starting to seem like an alternative energy technology, and that's where we are today. We haven't progressed much over the 60 years in thinking about nuclear, but that's how people started to talk about it. And I found this quote in some of my research when I was looking at how coal started in the reservation, and coal was actually was actually presented to the Navajo Nation Council as something that was a finite resource that had to be developed quickly because nuclear was on the horizon and was about to be the next energy technology. And so the Navajo Nation lawyer, who was a non-native, a white guy named Norman Little, told the Navajo Nation Council in 1966 that long after all of us have left this mortal world, coal will still be going strong. But when it does run out, you will have, I'm adding the you will have, thermonuclear power, which can create and generate electric power for far cheaper than hydropower. So this was the alternative energy future in 1960s. And this was something that the Navajo Nation and other tribes thought they had plenty of resources around, with the Grant's uranium belt. So it was seen as a development technology, something that the tribe would benefit from. But unknown to Navajo lawmakers, at that same time, the U.S. Congress Subcommittee of Labor were already hearing about reports of high cancer rates among uranium workers in that area. In Utah, in New Mexico, they were starting to see higher rates of cancer among people who worked in this industry. So in that year, 1966, the 3,200 uranium workers, 750 who were indigenous, 60 had already died of lung cancers. So that's when we're celebrating this as an alternative energy technology without these kinds of public health facts at hand. Between 1970 and 1986, when the last uranium mining shut down around the Navajo Nation, that's when we started to see an exacerbation of all of these cancer rates among former uranium workers, reaching their peak in the early 1980s and causing us to finally, after 20 years almost since the industry, more than 20 years since the industry started on the reservation, start to consider some of the health ramifications of participation. The image on the right is a clipping from 1960 that was on the AP wire that I thought was really interesting because it shows how racist the news was at the time. And it was basically, the Navajo Nation was considering uranium development, as a development technology, like I mentioned just before. And they were also considering it with labor laws. Do labor laws, do U.S. labor laws apply in the reservation? And at that time, the way that the white press interpreted it was, using all these racist characterizations and stereotypes that weren't even talking about the issue, right? It was just like starting out by just being racist and then saying, oh, by the way, they're considering whether or not labor laws pertain to the Navajo Nation. So you can see how the kinds of social and racial disadvantages tribal lawmakers were at in that time. This was also a time of termination when the relationship between tribes and the federal government were extinguished unilaterally by the federal government. So these were the kinds of threats that tribal nations faced. So if they resisted coal or uranium or any of these other kinds of development technologies that the Department of Energy and war planners had in mind to develop, you can imagine what kind of ramifications might be in store for those tribal communities that do that. So by the time we get toward the end of the decade, we see people are really working with uranium. Uranium is a booming industry in the Navajo Nation, and here I took this picture. I didn't take this picture. I wasn't around in '68. I took this picture. No, I got this picture from a newspaper archive that basically was commemorating a story that was commemorating the 100 years of treaty between the Navajo Nation and the United States, which was an 1868 treaty signed in 1868, and 1968 marked the 100-year anniversary. And the gist of the story was to say, oh, look at how far the Navajo Nation has come. And here you can see some sheep and sheep corrals, and then in this next picture, somebody's doing something very modern. They're interacting with uranium, which is something obviously that we know is very dangerous today. But at that time, again, these things were not being communicated to the Navajo Nation, right? We're already, like I said, 2 years earlier, the House of Representatives, that subcommittee was already considering the high rates of cancers among uranium workers in general, not just Indian workers, but uranium workers in general. So this is something that is just not being shared with Diné people. So by the time you get to the early 1980s, we really have an acute rate of cancer in the reservation from people who were former participants. And this is an image taken out of the Arizona Republic at the time of a former uranium worker with stricken with cancer from participating in that industry. You know, maybe one of those workers from the first slide who was going into the mine without any protective gear. And at this time, our tribal government starts to respond. We issue a moratorium against uranium mining, against any further uranium mining in 1983, which extended, was renewed in 1992, and finally codified in Navajo Nation law in 2005 in the Diné Natural Resource Protection Act. And I want to kind of get to that because I think it's important. I kind of want to. That's a terrible phrasing. I want to. I don't kind of want to. I want to get to that. So this was an image I took actually I think it was like the 31st or 33rd March in the legacy of the 1979 uranium spill that happened outside, in Church Rock, outside of well, it really is a reservation, but because of technical land boundaries, they consider it outside enough well, I don't know, we can talk about that when you look at the maps. But anyway, so this was a march that was happening, and it was actually like making connections at this point, as you can see, with some of the nuclear questions that were happening internationally with the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear meltdown of that nuclear power plant in Japan. And so they were making, uranium is good for nobody, is basically the connection that was being made. It started out being a violence against people in Japan, and it continued to be in 2011. And we were also making that connection with a commemoration of a famous uranium spill that happened. But this text on the side is actually coming from the DNRPA. So the image is to reinforce this idea that our ideas about uranium are changing and are starting to come around to thinking about how we critique it and how our histories with that industry inform how we think about development moving forward. So in this DNRPA, the Navajo Nation states, it's referring to itself, and it says, the Navajo Nation Council finds that the wise and sustainable use of natural resources in Navajo Indian country traditionally has been and remains a matter of paramount government interest of the Navajo Nation and a fundamental exercise of tribal sovereignty, brings it under to the realm of tribal jurisdiction. And one of the important points that were being discussed at this time, if you go back to the DNRPA, is whether or not we can prohibit both mining and milling. Is that right? Mining and milling. Somebody here knows better than I do. But apparently, I don't know resource law, but apparently, at least I don't, not like a lawyer, but the lawyers that were helping the Navajo Nation Council, the New Mexico Environmental, I think it's called the New Mexico Environmental Defense Fund or something like that, but they're based in Santa Fe. They were saying to the Navajo Nation that there are two different kinds of laws that apply to uranium mining. Then that they're under different kinds of federal jurisdiction, whether you're talking about mining or milling. And so you have to address both differently. That's what the non-native lawyers were telling Navajo Nation. And the Navajo Nation said, no, we can actually just ban it ourselves according to our own laws. And we're going to put forward this idea of Do Na Yeda, which applies to both. We're going to prohibit both of these things, and we don't care if it falls into different jurisdiction according to federal law. So it was an act of sovereignty, the way the DNRPA is positioning its response against the history of uranium mining. And then I wanted to promote some of the research of my former boss, Moroni Benali, and some of my former coworkers at the Diné Policy Institute, because they were actually thinking about the implications of this in terms of policy making in the Navajo Nation. How do we even extend this further into our not just environmental governance, but how we think about the economy, economic development, all of these other kinds of big words that are used that often move environmental questions outside of economic questions. And in this paper called Uranium and Diné Bikéyah Case, the authors try to create kind of a table and a criteria by which you can think about some of these projects, and especially uranium, in looking through Diné ideas of SNBH and which there's question whether or not you can say out loud, and I err on the conservative side there, but whether or not these kinds of minerals, whether or not uranium, fits within our ideas of air, or how we protect the air, or how we utilize the air, how we think about light and fire, water, earth, and pollen, corn pollen. So these are kind of ways that we ground ourselves in a natural law that's referenced. So they're taking these terms out of the DNRPA, and they're using it as a criteria now by which we judge future projects. And so that's a really unique kind of sustainable development model that you don't see anywhere else, that the Diné people put forward already almost 20 years ago. So I think we should give ourselves credit for already thinking through some of these ideas. And, we shouldn't be the ones following other environmental groups and organizations on these questions, but, because of things like the history of uranium mining and coal, which I think we'll talk about in the question and answer, and other kinds of resource-intensive development initiatives throughout the reservation, throughout our recent history in the Navajo Nation, we have kind of the historical experience and the wisdom to respond to those crises and going forward into the future of environmentalism on this continent. So that's it for my presentation, and then I'll turn it over to everyone else. I don't know what to do with that.
Thank you, Dr. Curley. I got to pull my mic way down. Too tall. Okay. I'm going to put up a map for our next presentation. Okay. Here, Tommy, I actually have some slides here that might be beneficial for you. Look, here's Tommy. I'm going to introduce him right now. He's here and he's on the screen at the same time. Okay. Dr. Tommy Rock is a presidential postdoctoral research fellow in the Department of Geosciences at Princeton University. He is Diné from Monument Valley, Utah, on the Navajo Nation. He earned his PhD from the School of Earth Science and Environmental Sustainability Program and an MA in Sustainable Community at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff. He formerly worked for the Navajo Nation Environmental Protection Agency in the Public Water Systems Supervision Program and with Tuolani Lake Enterprise as a water quality specialist. He currently serves as a member of the Diné Uranium Remediation Advisory Commission for the Navajo Nation. And I will put this map up here for you while you talk. This is Andrew referenced the 1979 church rock spill, so you can see there's an arrow that's pointing to where that's located. And Andrew, Tommy, and myself all have ties to Sanders, so that's an arrow pointing to that region of the Navajo Nation. And I will hand it off to Dr. Rock. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm introduce myself in Navajo. Tommy Rock here in Shadow, Olja Torinasha. Ada Shadone, no dashing, Nishlant, Leslambatashin, Torijin, Dashichedo, look at National. And for my clan, for our relatives that live out this way, I just said in Navajo that my maternal clans are the Ute Salt clan, and my father's clan are the Minigoats clan, and my maternal grandfather are the Bitterwater clan, and my paternal grandfather are the Reed People clan. That's how I introduced myself, and to my relatives, the Navajos that are here. And I've been involved with uranium research since 2006. And how I got here or in this position has to do with, for me, it was a personal journey and personal experience, and that has to do with my grandfather. My grandfather was a World War II veteran in the Army. He blew up stuff, so that skill served useful for him in mining uranium. And there's one story that really sticks out when I was little or younger, when I was just a little toddler. Him and I went on a little cruise. There's this one big open pit mine over in Monument Valley called Moonlight Mine. And it's a open pit mine, circular, about 150 yards circumference, about 100 feet deep, and it go in from the north and go all the way, come at the bottom from the south, and there's a big mine entrance to the west side of the wall, or east side of the wall, and there's a small entrance to the northwest of the wall. And as little kids, like prison with my grandfather saw that, and we went over there, and he stood at the entrance for what seems like hours. And as a little kid, went on some of the mine waste and played around in it, go on top, jump up, and at the time, I wasn't told of the danger. There was no warning signs, nothing whatsoever. So I was tired of playing around in the mine waste, and my grandfather was still standing there. And finally went back to the truck and just waited for him. And finally he came back. It was quite right all the way home. So many years later, got my bachelor's degree from Arizona State, and we're having brunch. And he told me the story of that particular place. And that mine, the Moonlight Mine, had a big entrance, and there was a big boulder blocking that. And as a teenager, me and my cousin used to explore a lot of those mines at Moonlight, around Monument Valley, went all the way to the end. A lot of those mines, saw the water. We hear stories of a lot of the elders, a lot of the people that used to work in those mines tell about how cold the water were. And it's true, it's like the waters were cold and nice and cool, especially on a really hot 100 degrees of weather. Go in there, it's nice and cool down there. And that particular mine though, well, my grandfather, at the time when I was mining that, it's like in the late 60s, there were 3 of them walking out, and there was a guy in front of him. He was the middle guy, and they were taking out some ore. And there's a guy behind him. Anyway, 2 of them made it out. The guy that was walking last didn't, and a big boulder fell at him and killed him. And the owner of the mine told everybody to go back home, and from that incident on, it's like nobody went back to work at that particular place. And you can see the old mining equipment, tools, and what have you there, like many years later. And I always that story stuck with me because I seen that boulder that he was talking about, and I always wondered what was behind it, and I did not know what was underneath it. So it was like, when I think about that and think back about what I've seen, you hear all these stories about uranium mines, former uranium mine workers dying of cancer, dying of exposure, but you hear it, but you don't really hear the stories of the people that were lost during that time when rocks or boulders or what have you fell on them, crushing them. And that particular mine, there's another story that I talked to an elder where they were mining, it's like I don't know how deep, and everybody went on the little break, and there's one particular guy that was still mining. There was water underneath, so there's like, they must have been working where the water table was, because the person that was mining in there kept on working, and a boulder fell on him and killed him, crushed him. And when the workers came back and started working again, they figured he went on a break, so they didn't really bother looking for him. By the time they realized what happened, they went back down there where he was working, and they removed the boulders and all. By the time they did that, he was gone. Like there was nothing left of him. So, so the people, when the workers came back out, they saw all the blood on themselves, and realized that there's nothing they could have done, or anyways. So from that side of my grandfather's story to what we went through as a family, where he died of cancer. That was like 2006, and he died of bone cancer. And once he passed, it had a domino effect. It's like numerous families that were involved with uranium mining in some way, some form, went really fast. They died of cancer one by one, really fast. And I remember one time there were two relatives that passed away 2 days from each other. And we used to have a big old family that used to come, and especially these were elders, so there were a lot of family that would come to a lot of these funerals. And slowly, it's like the more that was happening, the less and less people were coming. And pretty soon, some of the people that were on their way, they had nervous breakdowns, and they couldn't go through with it. So a lot of them stopped coming, and it was just too much to bear. So when I do my research and go to these communities and hear some of the stories from the community side, I know exactly what they're going through. I understand their frustration. I understand their anger. Because I hear a lot of that same anger and the frustration that we felt as a family, as a person, for myself as well. So realizing that same environmental justice, that same environmental issues, that concern, not only was coming from my hometown, from my family, but other families as well throughout Navajo Nation. The more I learned, the more I realized it's not just Navajo Nation, it's other tribes that are going through the same thing as we have. Like from the Hopi, the Paiute, the Havasupai, the Pueblo Nations, like up north, like Wind River, the Sioux Nation, Spokane, and it goes full circle, looking at the whole nuclear chain, from where the extraction happens to where it ends up, the Yucca Mountain. And not only the Yucca Mountain, but the White Mesa Mill and other tribes that are facing where the mine waste or the nuclear waste is going to go. So when you hear stories about, or when people talk about the nuclear fuel cycle or the clean energy that nuclear supposedly gives, which is true, but they don't talk about the full story. They don't talk about the whole nuclear fuel cycle. They don't talk about the people that are going to be on the receiving end. You don't hear that because as a Native population, and as a matter of fact, any minority population, we're kind of like just shunned off to a lot of these environmental exposure. With the project that we worked on, Janine and I, and with the stuff that we did with the London Lake Enterprise, we got this grant from USEPA about addressing the environmental concerns from what happened over in Church Rock. And with the water sampling that we did, we discovered that the public water was contaminated in Sanders and the school as well. So when you're dealing with environmental contamination, or the most vulnerable population are kids, people that have health issues, and the elderlies. So I don't know how long the elementary and middle school were exposed to that public water contamination, or the community of Sanders were exposed to that water contamination. And as a community, as a researcher, this has nothing to do with my dissertation. This was something I did entirely separate from any academia. And we, as a grassroots organization, as a community, we were able to fight back, and even with the data, concrete Western science, even with hard data, we still had an uphill battle with the regulators from the state and the federal government. And pretty soon, the Navajo Nation lawyer got involved, and U.S. Federal lawyers got involved as well. They didn't see anything on our conference call. and then during those conference call, I always think about, or at the time I thought about public health and their responsibility and what they're supposed to be doing, which is upholding environmental exposure, addressing public health from these environmental exposure. But in reality, though, in the real world, that's not happening. And it's still not happening to this day, especially with minorities. So it made me question a lot of things with the federal government, with people that work in these positions of power, these positions of where they can do something about these concerns from the communities that have been impacted. And a lot of them are dragging their feet. And it's happening in my tribe, in my community, and I know it's happening in many other communities of color as well. And for some time, I kind of shun away from the academia side, because I like what I'm doing at the moment. It's like prior to going to Princeton University, they had to really talk me into going. At first, I was like, yeah, right, sure, I'll listen to you, and it's like, yeah, whatever. But the person really did his homework, really did his research, and he's like quoting a lot of some of the stuff I've said and done, and I was like, all right, this guy is serious, so he did his research, so he got my attention, and next thing you know, I'm there. But I shun away from academia, I shun away from the federal government, and started really focused on just working with a grassroots organization, because as a former worker for Navajo EPA, I seen a lot and I learned a lot, especially trying to help improve the quality of life in those affected communities. I thought of my position as doing something from the top down, but it never really worked. And the more I help, my boss used to put me aside and tell me, he's like, that's not part of your job. You're not supposed to be doing that. It's like, don't do this, don't do that. It just got a lot of red tape. And in a lot of these meetings, I like to look across and see who was present at a lot of those meetings. And I see these grassroots organizations come to these meetings, and I see a lot of positive things that they were doing that were actually improving the quality of life for their community and actually doing something. And I looked at my position. I was in a position to do something, but I wasn't able to do it because I wasn't allowed to. So going back to school, that's one thing that I wanted to do, was work with grassroots. And I like what we did over in Sanders. And prior to being a postdoc at Princeton University, I was a postdoc at University of Utah with the Rocky Mountain Center for Occupational Environmental Health. Got the chance to work with Northern Arapaho and the Sioux Nation, looking at total petroleum hydrocarbon, sampling the Missouri River, the soil, see how much oil was in the river. This has to do with the Dakota Access Pipeline. So doing that work, and from the first day I stepped on campus at University of Utah, I told them that I don't want to be a professor, but they tried to pressure me into doing that. I was like, no, it's like, I told you, it was like, I don't want to be a professor because I want to learn some new skills and want to learn new things, but I'm not in a position where I want to be in that position where I can teach someone to figure. It's like, I still need a lot to learn to do, to help the students that really want to make impact in their community that are being impacted by these environmental issues. So I left that and I went back home and been working with the grassroots organization, and I like what I was doing, and I want to go back and start doing that again. But when it comes to environmental and abandoned uranium mines, there's still a lot that needs to be done, and I went and wrote this proposal and I shared that with my friend Diné about, I got this idea with all the stuff that was happening with Dakota Access Pipeline and how, as a tribal nation coming together, they became a lot stronger. And I figured it's like having a proposal about uniting the tribe, addressing environmental concern. I thought that was a great way to address a lot of these environmental issues and giving the power back to the tribe, giving the power back to the community, and empowering them. I figured that'll be a good way of moving forward, and instead of trying to fight a lot of these environmentals ourselves, either individually, grassroots, or as a tribe. It's like putting our strong points and working together and addressing a lot of these environmental issues. And so when going back to the topic of abandoned uranium mine, for me, this has been a personal journey, and it's still a personal journey, and I still hear a lot of those stories. I do have a Sioux grandmother, and she tells me a lot that goes on over in Pine Ridge, over in Cheyenne River, and some of the uranium issues that they're facing as well. And for Navajo Nation, we're a big tribe. We have 524 abandoned uranium mines, which is actually over 1,000, 1,200 abandoned uranium mines on Navajo Nation. And there's 4 Superfund sites, which goes into, like, there's 24 former uranium mill sites across the U.S. 4 of them are on Navajo Nation. And the 1,200 abandoned uranium mines have been reframed, and now it's like 524 abandoned uranium mines, which doesn't sound as bad compared to the actual numbers. Like reframing, they put a lot of the clustered mines together and reduce that number, so it's 524 abandoned uranium mines. But in the U.S. though, on the west, I believe there's 15,000 abandoned uranium mines. A lot of them are on tribal lands, near tribal lands, and there's few people that are trying to do something about this and trying to address this. And a lot of this goes back to what Dr. Curley talked about, the atomic bomb, the Cold War, the nuclear arms race. So a lot of that falls back on the federal government. So some of the mines that are out there are on, or over at Bears Ears as well, started doing some work over there as well. And there's a couple of sites, one site in particular that has a really high elevated level of radiation. And I took some of my colleagues from Princeton over there, and they were blown away by how high the readings were. So I haven't shared that with the public that much because I don't want some folks going out there being exposed, and when they don't really understand the consequences, like health-wise. And there are other places like that, which I haven't do that yet. And hopefully been working with like some grassroots organization and some other folks that hopefully doing more stuff like this, more public education can help bring more awareness to what's going on in a lot of these tribal nations and how a lot of tribal nations are trying to address these concerns related to natural resource extractions. All right.
Yeah, Dr. Rock, Tommy, I really appreciate your words. I mean, I think it's completely appropriate to have this like emotional response. I mean, this is how we should be reacting to these legacies. And you are completely right that there is often not this emphasis on the human impact of what this nuclear reaction has created that continues to reverberate through the generations and impact our communities. As you were talking, I know you couldn't see behind you, but I showed a couple images. Here's the DOE site, former Department of Energy site in Shiprock. So this is one of those former uranium processing facilities. This is a map that of abandoned uranium mines. This was provided by the EPA. So this just shows different clusters of those sites that Dr. Rock was mentioning. And then lastly, he mentioned this amazing community project that he did in Sanders community, which is where I did my dissertation research, kind of building off of what Tommy has done. And I think he just sets a really good example of traditional ecological knowledge and community partnership for research. And alongside Janine Yazzie, who's present in the audience, she's going to be in the next panel, Water and Relationality. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything about this map here of the exceedances of uranium before I introduce Talia?
Oh yeah, it's like this was we got some help from the community to do the sampling. We showed them the protocol. I had a quality assurance plan that was passed by USCP Region 9 Quality Assurance Office and was signed off by our tribe, Navajo Nation, Navajo Nation Environmental Protection Agency. And we had a 2-day training on stuff like coordinates, GPS, and why that was important when doing environmental research. Show them and educate them on water quality, radionuclide, and public health. And just like one day, the second day, we're out in the field doing sampling. So I was present on a lot of the sampling that was going on. If they have any questions, they would ask me questions, and I encourage that as well. So they'll ask me a question, I go and show them, and the reason why we're doing that way, doing the water sampling. And this map just shows you where the sampling has taken place. It's like south of the Perkle River, north of the Perkle River, and it just shows you the Perkle River with the uranium contamination in the groundwater. And so far as like I sit on the Uranium Remediation Advisory Commission, and I talked to USCPA Region 9 to make it just a super fun site, or trying to address this as well, and still nothing's happening, and we have no idea how far the plume is further down. So it's like I'm really curious about that. So some of the things that I'm doing over in prison is related to that, and trying to get some more concrete data as well, like getting soil sample from Church Rock, getting some water sample, and comparing isotopes. So I'm hoping that they match up, and I believe they will. When that happens, and I'll have scientific proof that it is coming from Church Rock, and it'll be round 2, going head-to-head with Region 9 again. So we'll go and bump heads with them again.
Thank you. I'll just put it back on this map so we can all reference it. Okay. Next, we have Talia Boyd, who currently works as the Cultural Landscapes Manager for the Grand Canyon Trust, based in Flagstaff, Arizona. She was born and raised in the Navajo Nation, growing up with a respect for the natural world through traditional Diné teachings. The dewatering of aquifers through the extraction of non-renewable energies and the alarming legacy of abandoned uranium mines throughout her homeland drove Talia to take action to protect her communities on the Colorado Plateau. Talia has spent years grassroots organizing in rural and indigenous communities on environmental and social justice issues. Some of her work has included community radio production, working closely with communities to address uranium legacy issues, the protection of sacred landscapes, and supporting indigenous voting rights. Please join me in welcoming Talia.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself in Navajo. She'e Talia Boyden she, Torich Eatney and Shle, Toy Haglini Bashichin, Glasche Deshichade or Tabahan Deshanella, Akut Al Diné and Shle. I was born and raised on the Great Diné Nation. I'm a mother and I'm a community organizer. And as Teresa mentioned, I'm the Cultural Landscapes Program Manager for the Grand Canyon Trust. And I'm very honored to be here with my distinguished brothers. And I'm really grateful for my relatives who came before us to present. So thank you all for having us here. I want to share my own story about how I got involved in the work, and then I'll dive into some of the work I've been doing around the White Mesa Mill, and a little bit about the Bears Ears National Monument, which has officially been restored today. So I want to thank all the 5 tribes that threw down to protect Bears Ears as a sacred landscape. That was tremendous, and it was definitely one of the first times that our tribes have come together to do that. That included putting aside historical tensions to work together, so that was crucial in making this happen. But first, let me go ahead and start with my own personal story about how I got involved. I grew up in a small community called Tonalea, Arizona, which is about 27 miles from Tuba City, Arizona. And every day on my way to school, I passed a uranium tailings mill, or uranium mill, called the Tuba City Disposal Site. It's also called Rare Metals. And so every day I passed this little community, which had a trailer park community next to it. And we used to pick up my friends who lived there. This was from elementary all the way to junior high. And we never knew what this thing was. It was just there. It wasn't fenced off. It wasn't capped. It was just there being exposed to the community. It wasn't until several years later that the community was told that they needed to relocate because it was highly contaminated. And by then it was too late because people were already dying and people were already getting sick. And so, it was only until a few years ago that they actually put up a fence around there that had signs. But after they capped it, they put a bunch of dirt basically on top of it. It looked like a huge sand dune, and it wasn't fenced at that time. So kids would go up on it and play on it and roll down it. And when it would rain, we're desert people, and when we get water, we're very happy. But our children would go up on this mine, this mill tailings pile, and they would play on it, and then they would play in the water that would gather at the bottom. And so this were some of the ways that we had been exposed. But then my family moved to Church Rock, New Mexico, which is home of the 1979 Church Rock spill. I don't know if anybody, can I get a show of hands of who knows what the Church Rock spill is? Yeah, and that's very unfortunate. So the Church Rock spill occurred 3 months after the 3 Mile Island incident, which I'm sure you're all very aware of. That community of 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania was immediately given resources. They were given national media attention, and they were, everybody was looking to see how they could help them. Again, 3 months later, within Church Rock, we had the Church Rock spill. Nothing. We had no national media coverage, very little, very minimum, if any. And to this day, we are still pleading for cumulative studies, be it air, soil, water, and health studies. And so for the past several years, I've been working within my tribal communities to help elevate those voices and to demand for justice in our communities. And so that's when I realized, and I was heartbroken, that wherever I went within my homelands, that they had been compromised by uranium legacy waste. And when I became a mother, of course, that fueled the fire even more. And so I fight the good fight for everybody's children and my own child. And so, I always say this is Native land, and it does not speak the English language. And this is why it's important for Native peoples to lead, because we know this land. We have deep, interconnected knowledge of this land, regenerative relationships that have been built since the beginning of time, as some of my relatives have mentioned before. This goes back into our cosmologies. We originate from Turtle Island. And Western science is barely catching up to what we've already known. This is our truth, and it's informed through our ceremonies, our oral history, and our blood memory. So this is how we as Native peoples can speak that truth. And to lead really in these movements when it comes to social and environmental justice. And so again, I'm very appreciative to everybody who does this work, because it's definitely not for the lighthearted or the thin-skinned, and there's a lot of sacrifice that goes into the work, right? As a mother being away from my child, this is in itself a huge sacrifice. And then going to these contaminated sites to take samplings, that's a sacrifice, right? So in many ways, a lot of our tribal communities, we know those struggles and we know that sacrifice as frontline communities. So I just wanted to highlight that for you all. But I really appreciate the space here, especially within the state of Illinois, being that Illinois has the most nuclear reactors in the country, right? I believe you all have 11 nuclear reactors here. That's more than any other state within the US. And so that really kind of, this is why the dialogue really needs to be amplified here as well. And we need to talk about these things and plant those seeds within others' minds. And so, we all have a responsibility within this climate crisis. And I believe, a part of that is really educating each other, taking up space and speaking the truth, right? And so I commend everybody for being here and making time to learn and listen, because there's not a lot of spaces where Indigenous people can share our knowledge and share our experiences. We're constantly being erased on a daily basis, and that's very prevalent. But with a lot of the great movements that have been occurring, such as No DAPL, it's really elevated and put the spotlight on Native peoples and how much we are very much leaders in this space, and how much we have to offer, and how our traditional knowledge systems provide those solutions to the climate crisis. Thank you. So I want to go ahead and segue into the White Mesa Mill. The White Mesa Mill is located 3 miles from the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, which is located in southeastern Utah, right on the front door of the Bears Ears National Monument. It was originally designed to run for 15 years before being closed and cleaned up. But 40 years later, the mill is still running. And community members are very much concerned about public health impacts, the contamination of land, air, and water, as well as the ongoing desecration of cultural and sacred landscapes around the mill. It is the linchpin for America's beleaguered uranium industry. What happens at the mill impacts communities all across the United States. The White Mesa Mill is the last operating conventional uranium mill in the country. So a lot of the waste that we see from all kinds of different facilities gets transported to the White Mesa Mill. And so now they're proposing and importing radioactive waste from the Baltic European nation of Estonia and also Japan and elsewhere. Once that uranium is extracted, the toxic leftovers are buried on site at the mill in what they called impoundments. Across the United States, tribal lands are unduly impacted by uranium mining. That's also globally. Uranium processing, weapons testing, and the storage of radioactive waste. Most uranium ore is mined in the western states. There are about 15,000 abandoned uranium mine locations in 14 western states. 75% of those are on federal and tribal lands, and there are 4,225 defense-related uranium mines with approximately 11% on tribal lands. So that really shows you how, again, Native communities have been impacted very much by the nuclear fuel chain. And as my brother Tommy mentioned earlier, we have nations across Turtle Island, like our relatives in Dakota Nation with the Black Hills, our Spokane relatives dealing with the Midnight Mine up in Washington State, also the Hanford site, our Western Shoshone relatives who are dealing with the Yucca Mountain repository. So we could go on and on about how our indigenous communities are being impacted by the nuclear fuel chain. Again, we are often on the front lines of defending our territories, our sacred landscapes, our resources, and our rights from extractive projects and corporate and outside interests. I want to talk a little bit about something called the offsite rule. There's a part of the Superfund law, and it's called the offsite rule. So when the EPA is cleaning up Superfund sites, they will often need to figure out where they need to relocate this hazardous material. In this case, it would be low-level radioactive waste going to the White Mesa Mill. The White Mesa Mill is the destination for most of those wastes, again, and it comes from a variety of other waste streams. Its primary business is the receipt of low-level radioactive waste, which they run through the mill to meet a regulatory requirement, which changes the definition of the material. Some of it, they do extract less than 1% of uranium and vanadium from that material, and whatever is left is again stored on site in those impoundments. And so a lot of it is really just waste that they're taking in. They like to call it quote unquote recycling, low level nuclear waste, but again, it's really just extracting less than 1% of uranium or vanadium from that material and then putting the rest of the waste on site. And so that's their main driver for their business, is they're basically getting paid to take this waste from other places. Some of these wastes are generated in perpetuity. So the company that owns the White Mesa Mill is called Energy Fuels Resources. And if they approve, and also the regulators, they're basically acknowledging that the White Mesa Mill is the preferred destination for these wastes forever. And so, again, those wastes will be generated in perpetuity. Along the way, it has transitioned into a short-term. It was at first a short-term ore processing facility, but now it's a long-term designation for the world's low-level radioactive waste. Again, bringing in waste from Estonia and also Japan. The thing here is that nobody has ever done NEPA on any of that. And, a part of NEPA is really asking what are the long-term environmental effects from this, coming from this facility, especially since it morphed into what it is now from what it was originally permitted to do to what it's doing today and what it may be doing moving forward. Part of the offsite rule is that the facility needs to determine the facility needs to be determined to be eligible to receive that. So the EPA periodically does an inspection, or they review the documents to see if anything has changed. What we have observed, along with the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, who does their own observations, is that things are changing around the mill, including the groundwater. So underneath the mill is a shallow aquifer, and underneath, which is already being contaminated. And under that shallow aquifer lies a bigger aquifer, the Navajo aquifer. And that aquifer is used by both Ute Mountain Ute and Navajo. So if that aquifer is compromised, then it impacts both tribes. And so we have deep concerns about that. Another big thing here too is that my brothers were talking about the waste on Navajo. They're proposing on taking that waste from the Church Rock spill that happened in '79 and taking it to the White Mesa Mill. So this is basically pitting tribes against each other, and they're very well, they do this a lot, and they do it regularly. For instance, a few years ago, there was a facility in Gore, Oklahoma called the Sequoia Fuels Corporation, and they had a ton of radioactive sludge from this facility. I could tell you some horrendous stories about that facility. They were using radioactive waste to treat hay for cattle, and then they were feeding the cattle this contaminated hay, and then they were selling the cattle on the market, to the open market. So there's a lot of ridiculous things that are going on like that within the tribal communities that we absolutely do not hear about, and that the companies don't want us to hear about, right? And that goes back to even the former uranium miners and how we have lost a lot of our former uranium miners. A lot of them aren't here, and the company really relies on that. They don't want anybody to know the truth, and so it's really sad how much of our Navajo people have been displaced and exploited by this industry. And so going back to the White Mesa Mill, again, we observed that there are definitely changes happening, especially within the groundwater. It's becoming more and more polluted. And then, of course, the issues of airborne emissions and the impacts to vegetation and wildlife are definitely getting worse. You know, the thing here, too, is that the pollutants in the groundwater are well, they're there, and then what the state of Utah has authority to regulate the White Mesa Mill through what they call an agreement program, which is a program designed through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where they basically give the state authority to regulate low-level waste or other special radioactive material. And so in this case, this is what the state of Utah has done. They applied for this agreement state, and they were approved. And so this is how the state of Utah is able to regulate what's going on within the White Mesa Mill. But through that, they also are working with the EPA, and what happens there is that once the groundwater gets contaminated, what the EPA does is kind of just lift those standards, right? They up the standards so that it falls in compliance with what's happening at the mill. And as it's getting more and more contaminated, all they do is kind of raise those standards higher and higher. So it's just, you know, kind of them just sweeping it under the rug. And again, this is something that's very rampant around not only the White Mesa Mill, but around a lot of the abandoned mines and cleanups that we see across Indian country. Excuse me, there's a lot of monitoring data that shows this as well, that the tribe has also shared with communities and also partners that they're working with. So it's very disconcerting. And what the state has done over and repeatedly over the years, as I mentioned, is relax those standards so that this facility stays in compliance with their permit. Now, it's very important for Energy Fuels because if they're not eligible to receive the waste from a Superfund or other locations because of their out of compliance, then the EPA will no longer allow them to accept that waste. So again, the state of Utah is constantly raising those standards. It's very disturbing, but this is what's going on the ground on a daily basis. So I kind of want to highlight some of the health and environmental hazards again around the mill. They have what they call cells 1, 2, and 3 at the mill, and they were constructed with a single thin plastic liner between the layer of soil and the layer of crushed rock. Today, these cells would be built with 2 liners and a system meant to detect and collect anything leaking through the first liner before it escapes into the environment. And then also, the mill emits radioactive and toxic air pollutants that can travel off-site, including radon, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxide. Stockpiled ore and alternate feeds that are not adequately covered can also blow off-site. And the White Mesa residents have reported smelling the pollutants from the mill. Every year, the White Mesa Ute community has an annual protest and spiritual walk, which actually yesterday and today, they had a virtual conference for the White Mesa community. You can catch that on Facebook. We're partners in that event, so you can go onto the Grand Canyon Trust website, and there's also another organization called Green Action based out of the Bay Area who are also partners in organizing that. So we will definitely post those to our websites if y'all are interested in checking that out. Again, it's really amplifying the tribal voices of the Ute Mountain Ute White Mesa community, and really again building solidarity amongst other tribal nations who are also impacted by the nuclear fuel chain. Excuse me. So every year, when I went to the White Mesa community to go to the protest walk before COVID, it's about 4 miles between the community and the mill. And so as you get closer, you can smell these toxic radioactive chemicals. And when I first went, I got a headache and my eyes started tearing up and almost started burning. And it was hard. It was hard to be there, and it was, and it just broke my heart, because this is what our white Mesa Ute relatives deal with on a daily basis, right? And they won't let their kids play outside because that's how dangerous it is, and that's how, it's how terrible the smells are. So they just keep their children inside most of the time. A lot of the rabbits around the area, which the Ute hunt, are no longer available. A lot of the vegetation has died. And so that's really, again, alarming, and it shows how much this mill is contaminating the area. There's also the fact of trucks coming into the facility, and the transportation routes that they take are usually through major highways or railways. But then once they're unloaded, they travel on, through rural communities, which again, none of our communities are really or at all prepared for any kind of radioactive catastrophe if it should happen. Again, too, these trucks usually travel at night when nobody can see them. I live in Gallup, New Mexico, which is on the border. It's a border town to Navajo Nation, but as my fellow colleagues have mentioned earlier, we live next to the Grants Mineral Belt, where there are some Superfund sites from the Homestake mine site and also the Jackpile mine site. There are new proposed uranium mining around one of our sacred mountains, Mount Taylor, which is called Roca Honda Mine. So they're still proposing new uranium mining, especially within or around our sacred spaces. And that is also very alarming. And Janine and I actually worked on a few things a few years ago, because what we noticed was that when working with federal and state entities, we weren't really getting anywhere, right? And we were frustrated, and we realized that our local decision makers were leaving the door open for these companies to keep coming back in. And so what we decided to do was to challenge our county commissioners and push on them to put a temporary moratorium on all uranium mining within McKinley County. And of course, we got immediate pushback from the state land office and other entities. But what they did, they backpedaled, and what they did promise us was that they were going to put together a uranium task force to start looking at the cumulative impacts of what was going on around the McKinley County communities. And again, we were just really asking for space for our communities to kind of breathe and step back and really assess how much we had been impacted by the nuclear fuel chain. That's something our communities had never had, right? And so we didn't think it was a whole lot to ask for, but again, we got pushback. We pushed on them as much as we could. We started meeting with the county commissioners monthly. We filled up the county commission meetings. We had people sharing testimonies. We were writing letters letters to the editor, op-eds to the Gallup Independent. We went to the Navajo Nation Diné Hatatli Association, which is an association of our medicine men and women, and we got a letter of support and resolution from those folks. So we went to several different departments within Navajo governance to get support, and they definitely supported all of that. But that's only to highlight that this was just one of the other strategies that we used to really try to hold these companies accountable and demand transparency and demand justice. So that was one of the things, and that is still an ongoing effort. I transitioned to a new position, and there were other leaders in the community that were willing to take it up. But yeah, and like a lot of folks have mentioned before, I always call this life work, right? Because once you're in it, and nuclear issues, they're so long term, right? When you think about it, the half-life of uranium is 4.5 billion years, and so this is like I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. Whether I'm paid or not to do this, right? I mean, this is a part of just being Native and Indigenous, is that we don't choose to be political. We're kind of just thrown into it, right? Because we demand that our sacred spaces be protected. So going back again to the White Mesa Mill, There's definitely concerns about the groundwater contamination. There's also the fact that the state Utah regulators may not be requiring Energy Fuels to guarantee enough money to be available for cleanup of the mill if the company fails to do so. So the current guarantee is called a surety bond, and it's only for about $20 million, and that's not nearly enough for cleanup. Cleanup of these kinds of facilities costs usually hundreds of millions of dollars. So 20 million is definitely not enough, and it doesn't cut it. What is the state of Utah proposing to do? Well, the mill has been operating with the state's blessing since 2007 under an expired radioactive materials license, which is the main or operating permit for the mill. That license was renewed in 2018, so it gave the company a green light to run the mill for another decade. Unfortunately, this is probably the second time that they've done that. Energy Fuels also has a groundwater discharge permit that is meant to prevent groundwater contamination, but that permit expired in 2010, and again, the state renewed it in 2018. So during that time, there was no permit, and they shouldn't have even been doing it. And also in 2018, the state gave Energy Fuels permission to process, again, that radioactive sludge from the Sequoia Fuels Corporation that was coming from the Cherokee homelands. And that definitely, again, pitted tribes against each other, right? Because waste was coming from one tribal nation to another, and that really is very divisive for tribes. And we're still trying to heal from a lot of the environmental degradation that we have experienced. Yeah.
Can I segue to a question?
Sure.
We have 15 minutes.
Okay, yeah.
Oh,
Well,
sorry.
I will go ahead and
Is this on?
wrap
Okay.
it up.
Yeah, thank you.
I could talk all day about this stuff.
Sorry, we talk a lot.
No worries.
Well, hey, all of you for providing so much important context for the nuclear legacies in the Southwest. I'm certain that most people do not know these connections. And I really appreciate how you highlighted how the state of Illinois has the most nuclear facilities. I did not know that. So in lieu of time, I'm going to ask one question, which is addressed to all of you. And then we'll, with whatever time is remaining, I'll open it up to the audience to ask perhaps one or two questions. So what I wanted to ask is, so with today's announcement about the restoration of Bears Ears, how does this change the trajectory of energy development and or radioactive waste disposal in the region, such as White Mesa Uranium Mill? And in particular, to what extent will the National Monument restoration, in your view, actually protect Indigenous communities from potential uranium reactivation in the region? And I'll start with Andrew.
Me?
Sorry. You can speak about
What is
coal.
Bears Ears? I'm going to pass in the interest of time. Sorry.
Are you really okay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I thought
Okay,
you were just
Tommy
playing.
and Talia.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's tremendous. Bears Ears being restored is actually, when the Trump administration shrunk Bears Ears, they did it by 85%, right? And it broke it into two little units. A lot of the land that was taken out of the protection of the National Monument was land that was very rich with uranium resources. And so this was a part of the strategy as far as uranium lobbyists and the uranium companies, because they did lobby the Trump administration, pushing for them to shrink the National Monument, which is why they did it, because they wanted to get to those uranium reserves. But with the monument being redesignated, it definitely protects those lands that were previously cut from the Trump administration. So these uranium companies won't be able to do what they want to do as far as taking uranium out of the ground. And then around the White Mesa Mill, it definitely, again, will help shut down the proposed uranium extraction that they want to do within the National Monument. But it also will help the surrounding tribal communities to, again, continue to work on the issues around the legacy waste that's coming off of Navajo and legacy waste that's coming off from other tribal communities, and to really help build that solidarity amongst our nations, but to also educate everybody around the issues and how we're experiencing those as frontline communities, how we're addressing those issues as well.
Thank you. And Tommy, kind of building upon that question, I'm also curious about your position on the Diné Remediation Advisory Commission and what potential or any conversations that you're having within that capacity about uranium reactivation in the region.
Oh, I'll do the Bears Ears question first. It's like, for the Bears Ears, I've seen quite a bit of abandoned mines in Bears Ears, and talking to some of the community members. Some of them know where some of these mines are, but they don't know where all those mines are located. And going on the BLM website, it just mentions that there are mines out there and they're hazardous. That's about it. Nothing related to what's out there, like uranium or radiation, and the health consequences related to that. And there's a national monument there, the National Bridges National Monument. They're same things, like talks about the hazard of these open mines, but nothing in relation to uranium mines or being exposed to it. And I've seen signs up from the Bureau of Land Management that they're going to do some reclamation, or not reclamation of but remediation. And I don't know how much they're having input from the tribal nation, the 5 tribes, and how they are going to work with TEK, Traditional Ecological Knowledge, or if they're going to do that. San Juan County in the state of Utah, from my experience coming from Utah, is that they don't have a really good reputation of working with tribe, especially with San Juan County. It's like, I know that San Juan County, we had a big old fight just redistricting our area to make it more, the tribe more representative in terms of being represented in elections and all. So it'll be interesting to see that. And going back to the Diné Remediation Advisory Commission, I know that we've had this conversation within the Uranium Commission that we are against it. And the discussion that we need to have is where to put the cell of where, like regional cells where these minor waste can go. And well, we haven't had that conversation yet. And it's something that we need to have, and it's something that needs to be done to help speed up the process of cleaning up these abandoned uranium mines on Navajo Nation. So far, it seems like we've been going in circles with the federal government, with our, with Navajo EPA as well. And it's like every meeting that we've had since I've been on anyways, we mostly talk about regional mines and what the work is, where the work is at, what needs to be done, and everything's been redundant ever since. So it's been really frustrating. And I don't know if I'm going to be still on this Uranium Commission, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's just been really frustrating just being there. And the other things, we have no teeth. Is like we're just an advisory commission, and we can advise them, but with Navajo EPA and the federal government, they can choose to ignore us as well. It's like I didn't know what to say about that. It's just, yeah, it's just frustrating.
I'd like to
go
add
ahead.
to
Yeah.
that, if I could. There is the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, which is the 5 tribes, excuse me. They're currently working on their own land management plan. And so this, with the redesignation of the monument, it's really going to allow them more space and time to implement that plan. Again, this is a plan that's a land management plan that's created by the tribes and not these federal agencies. So this is a tremendous time for them to do that as well. But also a part of that too is their Traditional Knowledge Institute, which is what they're working on as well right now and hoping to add to the layer of protections around bears' ears. So I just wanted to include that real quickly.
Teresa, I was wondering if we might be able to give people kind of references for bears' ears to follow up on, because we just introduced. I mean.
No,
anyway.
thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I just felt bad because I didn't mean to be facetious about not knowing what it was. This is such a big topic, and people know it better.
So one resource is, of course, Talia's organization, Grand Canyon Trust. Also, Utah Diné Bikéyah, which is an organization based in Salt Lake, but it's an Indigenous-led coalition who has been working alongside the Intertribal Coalition in this campaign to protect bears' ears. Angelo Baca, who's seated in the back, works with Utah Diné Bikéyah. So he'll be speaking on behalf of those bears' issues tonight as part of our film, Public Trust. Any other resources that are relevant that I'm missing?
The Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition website is a good one to go to. What else? Let's see. A book?
Oh yeah, there's a book. Oh, well, we could talk about that.
What's the book called?
It's called Bears' Ears.
Edge of Morning. It's a small book, Edge of Morning. There's a lot of different Indigenous contributors. I think that's put out by Torrey House Press and edited by Jacqueline Keeler. With the 5 minutes that we have left.
I do have one more resource to throw
Oh,
out there.
go ahead.
It's called a small documentary. It's called Half-Life, and it's around the White Mesa Mill. So it's it breaks it down in 15, 20 minutes. It's a good little short doc. Again, it's called Half-Life.
Thank you. Does anybody have a question? Yes. Who wants to take that?
Andrew. I'm sorry, I can barely hear you.
Oh.
I kind of have bad ears too, so I apologize.
Rephrase of what I'm saying. Just the implications of Deb Haaland's appointment and what how this affects energy, sacred lands protection.
Yeah, well, I think Auntie Deb is doing really great as far as the tribal consultation, which I think Biden administration has really pushed for more tribal consultation with Native nations, but also his commitment to environmental justice, I think, is also another great way for both the Department of Interior and the Biden administration to continue to meet and consult with tribal nations. I will just note that consultation is not consent, though, and this concept of free, prior, and informed consent is something that within Indian country we're definitely talking about and wanting to implement more, especially within our decision-making processes. So I think this was definitely, having Auntie Deb in this position is definitely carving out more space for Native peoples to have those conversations and to plant those seeds and to continue to bolster those dialogues.
My Marxist geography response is to say, not to be cynical, but to say that we still work within structures of power. So even when you replace certain people with, indigenous people, even if you were to put environmental activists into that position, Winona LaDuke as Secretary of Interior, I still think you would have the same kind of power dynamic. It wouldn't be, the same kind of policy, obviously, as a Trump administration or a Republican administration, but when you're basing your laws off the doctrine of discovery, off plenary power of Congress, off of these kinds of colonial laws that are still part of everyday practices of the federal government with tribes, you're limited by law with what you can do. And so that's, those are some of these older colonial ideas that need to be replaced, not just the people, but the laws themselves.
Yeah.
Well, it's like talking about your questions or answering the questions from my research and what we're faced today is like we need to find another source of energy and natural extraction. We've seen the consequences related to that with coal mining, uranium mining, and I think not only as tribal nation or tribal communities, but as a nation as well, that there needs to be like another alternative solution to this energy issue that we're facing now. So I think it won't be an easy answer or a quick answer, but it's going to be an ongoing discussion within tribal communities and tribal nation as well. So even now, that when she's in power in the U.S., we're beginning to have this conversation of alternative energy, where that energy is going to come from. As the researchers, I know there's research looking at thorium reactors as a source or as a solution to the energy issue. And also, I know up in Canada, they're looking at smaller nuclear reactors as a solution as well. But I don't know what the answer to that will be. But I know as a tribal community and as a nation, it's something that we need to answer. And as we keep growing, not only as a country, but as well as there'll be a lot more pressure or more research going to that question. So it's kind of leave it hanging there, but it's like it's going to be an ongoing discussion. And even though it's some as a activist or as a researcher or as community members, some won't like the outcome of it, and some won't agree with it. But we have to find whatever that energy source will be, though.
Thank you. And you raise an excellent point, and I think part of the connection that we were trying to draw in our conversations, between Andrew's research, which is primarily coal and energy development, and both of you two in your community engagement around uranium, is when we're thinking about conversations of green energy, of sustainability, nuclear is seen as the alternative to coal. Right? It is seen as, this is the green option. It is carbon neutral. So the language that the settler state is imagining is to imagine nuclear as a vision for the future, which in a way, Andrew and I both talked about this before, that's not that different from these Cold War ideologies of technological advancement that we saw in the 1960s. So it's nuclear is still seen as the vision of the future. But as I hope all of this is abundantly clear, it is not a viable solution for the protection of our homelands.
Yeah, I want to add to that. When we talk about nuclear energy, we often don't talk about the whole nuclear fuel chain, right? And how the front end is very carbon intensive due to the mining, the milling, and the transportation of uranium ore. And then, of course, after it comes out of the reactor, there's this high-level waste, right? There is nowhere in the world to store high-level radioactive waste. This is a problem globally. And so what they do is they put all this low-level waste in interim storage across all of these facilities across the U.S., mostly at nuclear facilities. And so this is a part of the problem, too. But I would also highlight that a lot of these extractive industries, including oil and gas, also unearth a lot of radioactive materials too, right? So this is also a part of how these different extractive industries are really very much connected in a lot of ways. When they're fracking for oil and gas, they're also, again, unleashing some radioactive materials underground. But that's also that's not heard of very often, right? So it's important to include that in the dialogue, but to also highlight how, again, the nuclear fuel chain is not green, it's not clean, because it's very carbon intensive, and then of course the high level waste that comes out at the end.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope we can have more dialogues like this. Bikéyah. Please join us for our third and final panel.